Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our session this morning, part of the Humber Business Growth Support Programme for local businesses across the Humber region. Today, we're going to be talking about sourcing new suppliers and managing supply chains effectively. Joining us today is a presenter that's been with us for the last 2 months through the whole COVID pandemic, offering very pertinent and real advice to businesses to help them on all manner of different topics. Today, talking about supply chains and managing them effectively, we have Steve Page, Director of Page Consulting, who's going to run through the session for the next couple of hours with you. Just before I hand over to Steve, just to make you all aware, there is a question function on the GoToWebinar page you should be able to see. So if you can all find the question function on your dashboard there, I would encourage you to ask whatever questions you've got throughout today's presentation as they come up, and we'll make sure that I reiterate them through to Steve so we can answer any of your questions. So as he goes through the presentation today, if there's something you're not quite sure about, or if you'd like to ask something more specific related to your business, please use the question function. It will come through to me. I will reiterate it to Steve and he'll be able to answer it for you. We'll be having a break midway through, so it'll be a chance for you to get yourself a fresh cup of tea or coffee, nip for a quick toilet break if needs be. One recommendation for everybody, as this is a 2-hour presentation, please do make sure your devices are plugged in so we don't lose you midway through. Okay, so that's it. Without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Steve to talk to you about managing supply chains effectively. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Paul. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're sitting comfortably. What I will do today is sort of spend a little bit of time, sort of moving my boxes around, I'll spend a little bit of time with you talking about some of the experiences that I've had so that we can put a real practical flavour to the webinar, and then sort of go through some of the steps and stages and the structure that has been involved in those supply chain development and supply chain management projects that I've had an involvement in. So we're going to spend, as Paul said, a couple of hours going through this. It's a big topic, there's lots of stuff to cover, and hopefully I'm able to pull out some of the things that are more relevant to the COVID outbreak and some of the change in circumstances and situation that we see at the moment, with a view to help you to look at your business position, the prospects that you see moving out into this rather uncertain future, so that you can take advantage of all the sort of tools and techniques that are available to help your business initially survive and then thrive by having really effective supply chains in place that will help your business to be able to deal with the circumstances that you're facing. So my name's Steve Page, as mentioned, and I am a director of a local business support and training company called Page Consulting Limited. This webinar is one of a cluster of webinars that are currently available to you, and they sort of all interlink and are all related. So if you find some useful information coming out from today, which I hope you will, then consider the sister webinars that are running next Wednesday afternoon and the Wednesday afternoon after that. Next Wednesday is Dynamic Leadership, and the Wednesday afternoon after that is restructuring your business and some guidance on how to do that, but are all totally interrelated to what we're going to be covering today in terms of sourcing new suppliers and managing supply chains. One other webinar, which I think will be of particular interest to you also, that is also closely related to what we're saying. It's not shown on this slide, but just one for you to note. Is the Mental Health and Wellbeing webinar, which is running next Wednesday morning. That's the 3rd of June. So check it out on Eventbrite and get yourself booked onto that. Rachel Alexander, a close colleague of mine, will be running that, and there's some really excellent information in terms of the people dimension that is so important in terms of managing the uncertainty at the moment. So I hope you enjoy today, and there are other webinars which are available to you free of charge as part of the Humber Growth Hub's support programme. A little bit about my background, but more relevant, some of the experiences that I've had in terms of supply chain management. My background is in the aerospace industry, where I sort of trained as an engineer. I'm now chartered, but have since progressed to set up and run a portfolio of businesses. So I'm sort of an entrepreneur business owner, and therefore experiencing personally all of the challenges that you yourselves and your businesses are experiencing, and therefore can sort of relate to your situation, I think, in a way that is sort of being in there with you. That also helps me with the business coaching and the mentoring and training programs that I run to support local businesses and regional businesses as well. So I'm sort of living it and experiencing it along with yourselves, and therefore hopefully I'm able to pull out the things which I believe are going to be most relevant and pertinent to you in webinars like this. So what I wanted to do was just give you a little bit of an insight into some of the supply chain development projects that I have been involved with over the last sort of 20 odd years. That puts a practical dimension on to what all this is about. And then we can spend time through the rest of the webinar looking at the steps and the stages and the process that each of these projects followed, so that you get both a practical feel as well as the sort of theory and supporting tips and techniques that we used as part of running or developing these supply chains. So quite a diverse range. I'm not going to go into too much detail on them, but just to sort of set the scene so that you can sort of get a bit of a feel, because there may be aspects associated with them that run parallel to some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment, or at least some of the aspects of them. So the first one I just wanted to chat about was way back in my aerospace days, when I was chief engineer of a division within the company that designed and developed the training equipment that supported the military aircraft that were being sold. And I headed up a small team of about sort of 60, 70 people, based at Brough, just on the North Bank, where we were designing and developing training equipment for the Hawk aeroplane. Now, it was a real poison chalice of a job, because at that time, the training equipment had real aircraft equipment in it, which was really expensive and was always late, which is no good when you've got to get your training equipment out to those air forces at least 6 months before the aircraft arrive, so that the aircrew and the ground crew can be properly trained. And if the aircraft equipment that you need in that training equipment doesn't arrive until a week before the aircraft is due to be delivered, you've got yourself a real problem. So we took that challenge head on, and we developed some cheap and cheerful PC-based training equipment and developed the software to run in them that enabled us to undertake the training. And we could get the training equipment out on time, and the software was written to the same standard as the aircraft software. So we had a high degree of accuracy associated with how things worked. Now, the effect of that was absolutely phenomenal, in that it reduced the cost phenomenally. Real aircraft equipment, incredibly expensive, in comparison to the cheap and cheerful PC-based software. And we were able to solve the inherent problem of getting the equipment out early enough and not doing negative learning, because what we were using turned out to be different from what was actually delivered. Now, that business that we had, which was turning over about £2.5 million in terms of the Hawk aircraft, we were able to scale up, and for each of the other aircraft that were in the military aircraft division's product range, we were able to introduce that same approach, throw out the aircraft equipment and bring in the PC-based solutions. It meant a fundamental change to the supply chain that we were using, and gave us some real issues scaling up. But in a 5-year period, we took a £2.5 million business to a business that was turning over in excess of £100 million. And it was all done with that particular change and the introduction of a new product that really hit the market and solved some of the fundamental problems that were associated with it. And the reorganization, the redevelopment of the supply chain was absolutely critical in us being able to meet the new demands that were being placed on us. I learned more about business in those 5 years than I think I have done in the rest of my years working in business since then. Absolutely phenomenal. So if you're in a situation where, as a result of COVID, the market is being so disrupted and the things that might have been okay before are now not okay, and you're looking to try to come up with some new novel solution that you can introduce, but know that it's not just that, but it's the whole of the supply chain that has to be introduced and developed so that you can scale up, then some of the techniques that we'll be covering today should be of significant interest to you. Another interesting project that I was involved with was looking at the development of a supply chain from scratch. I was involved in a joint venture agreement between British Aerospace and Saab Aerospace, where we were looking at making some changes to their excellent air defence aircraft that they had in Sweden. A fantastic little aeroplane that was incredibly agile and used the road system as its runways. So rather than all the aircraft being located on a base, which if attacked could be lost, they were dispersed all over the country and took off and landed off ordinary roads. So they just closed the road, aircraft would land, refuel and take off again. Now, that aircraft was designed and developed for really, really low Scandinavian temperatures, from sort of like plus 10 degrees to minus 40 in terms of its operations. But there was some significant interest from a number of the African countries who also wanted to use similar tactics in the defence of their countries, or who didn't have large comprehensive air bases that they could deploy aircraft from. And the joint venture was looking at how we could re-engineer that aeroplane in order to be able to operate in the other extreme temperatures, the very high end, from sort of like minus 10 to plus 50 degrees. And there's some significant engineering challenges with that. Not only that, but the African countries insisted on having a relatively high content of the aircraft using their own aerospace industry suppliers. So I had to take a small team to some of the African countries in the southern part of Africa on a 5-6 week journey, where we went around each of the individual companies that were of interest in terms of their capabilities to be able to make stuff to go onto the aircraft. And there were some superb companies that we were able to look at, assess, and evaluate, and decide whether or not they had the opportunity or the potential to be able to build stuff that could go on this new adapted aeroplane. And I can remember some of the companies that we went to were really sort of quite unsuitable, but nevertheless they had still applied. One had got a really fantastic website. And when we went along to see him, it was in this small little township right out in the middle of nowhere. And we went down this dirt track to sort of like a tin shed where they were building bits and pieces, primarily parts for tractors and agricultural equipment. And they were looking to see if they couldn't get into making aircraft panels and other stuff. So just bringing through that importance of not necessarily just relying on the published materials, the websites, and those other things that suppliers might put out, but actually physically going along, eyeballing them, meeting up with them and seeing what they're really capable of helps you to select the suppliers of choice that will really be the ones that will be best suited to you. Other projects, again, quite different. This is back in the UK, a caravan motorhome company that was enjoying some incredible success in terms of its growth. And the company had really got to grips with segmenting the market such that it could identify all the different customer groups and the specific needs that they might have, and developed caravan or motorhome products to meet their needs. You know, the 2-berth, the 3-berth, the 4-berth, the 6-berth, a variety of different shapes and sizes that would be pulled by different classes of car, budgetary needs. They had absolutely mastered it. And as a result of that, their growth was really shooting up, to such an extent that they had a plethora of different products, each one grouped around the different customer groups that they had and were selling into through a dealership network. That the factory just became so congested. They started off small, so they did everything themselves, and as they grew, they carried on with that particular concept. So they had these cottage industries dotted around all over the factory site, where they were making cushions, and they were making carpets, and they were making kitchen carcasses. They were making all sorts of stuff, and it got to such a point that key little bottlenecks were starting to form all over everywhere, and the line wasn't being fed with everything in the correct way. So stopping and starting, things were coming off the end of the line and were going in a field because bits weren't ready for them on the assembly line, and they were having to be retrofitted later. And the profitability of the company just started to slump. They were the biggest, but they were not the ones that were making the most money. And we introduced a Factory of the Future program, which fundamentally challenged all these little cottage industry things that they got set up, and put in the development of a very comprehensive supply chain, where a lot of the things that they were doing themselves that were causing the problems were then able to be outsourced to companies that were set up to be able to deal with that volume much better than the company was itself. Phenomenal success. They really, really made that work. And as a result of the efforts that they put into the supply chain development, they carried on growing, but the profits returned, and they are one of the surviving organisations that exist today, or many have fallen. So the potential of introducing, developing, nurturing and growing supply chains can be absolutely critical at key points in the development and growth of a business. I've also been sort of involved on the other side with a program, some of you may know of it if you're from the sort of Humber region, called Greenport. And the Greenport project was all about helping regional businesses gain access to the renewable energies opportunities, particularly offshore wind. And I have been a business support partner with a program which has now just recently finished, where we've been helping local businesses to become supplier ready and to be able to win contracts and opportunities in those particular sectors and industries. And it's been a remarkably successful project off the back of that. There's now a follow-on program called the Supply Chain Network, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that at the end of this webinar, because there's some really excellent support that is available from that team, and they carry all of the experience from their Greenport days to help regional businesses gain access to not just renewables, but to a wide range of sectors. So again, that might be of relevance and of help to you sort of moving forward. And in the meantime, I have been supporting a whole range of medium to small to medium size businesses, enhance their performance and refine and improve their supply chains over the last sort of 10 to 15 years on a sort of a smaller scale, but nevertheless one that has still been really effective. So I hope just sort of touching on some of these projects and the diversity and the range of them gives you a little bit of a feel for just how powerful taking time out to have a little look at your supply chain, your suppliers, and how fit for purpose that might be in what is an incredibly uncertain and challenging time. And to take a moment to think and ask some questions about how well set up you currently may be in terms of meeting some of those challenges that may lay ahead. Because now's the time to do something about it, particularly as the restrictions are starting to ease in terms of getting ready and prepared for that. So, demonstrated incredible power and benefit can come from doing it. Multiplicity of different situations, company sizes, circumstances, but each one of them has all followed a set of steps, a structure to go through. So whether yours is a large challenge or a small challenge, it doesn't really make a difference. There's a set of steps that you can follow that hopefully will give you the results that you're looking for as you go through it. And it's those steps that I'm wanting to really base this webinar around, so that you can get a feel for, no matter what the nature of the practical project in hand, following these steps and undertaking them should serve you well. So in terms of the steps, they are here, and we'll spend 15 minutes or so looking at what's involved in each one, and just sort of talking you through those, giving you some hints and tips in terms of how you might be able to follow this same process with a view to looking at and developing your supply chains and making some changes to them. So they start off with what we call a situation review. It's stepping back, fundamentally having a little look at what's changed or what's changing, and what you need to do about that, which then moves us into the second step, which is to rethink and adapt. So what are we going to do different? How radical does it need to be? What are the things that we need to change? Moving us then on into the next step, starting to implement those particular adaptations or changes that you're wanting to make. So getting that rebuilding, that change introduced, and including the supply chain as an integral part of all of the other improvements that are taking place. It's not something separate. It shouldn't be considered as an afterthought, and therefore needs to be done in an integrated way. Leading us on to the final bit, which is having now got the new supply chain in place, how do we go about developing it further, improving it, refining it, bedding it in, and making sure that it delivers the performance improvements that we're looking for as part of an ongoing upkeep and management of all of the support that you are needing from those external suppliers that you select and choose to support and serve you. And then, as I mentioned, just sort of touch on this supply chain network, a project support team that's available to you, and I'll give you a little bit of detail on that because they're well worth following up, registering on their business directory and starting to benefit from some of the support services they can provide to you, which can include helping you to identify future opportunities as well as new suppliers, potentially with the opportunity to set up introductions for you as well. So a lot of good can come out from that, and that sits alongside and works in a compatible way to the Humber Business Growth Hub, which have laid on today and a range of other webinars that you're experiencing and hopefully benefiting from. So that's what we're going to be taking a bit of time out to look at today. What I'd like to do is to give you the opportunity. We've got some questions and answer sessions at the end, but rather than leave them all to the end, you can if you want, but if not, then give you the chance to ask any particular questions you may have at the end of each of these sessions. So my colleague Paul will receive them, so if you just use your chat function to ask any particular questions, and at the end of each chapter, Paul and I can look at the questions that you're asking and hopefully give you some answers to those. So you're getting that clarity as we go through the course of the webinar. As Paul said, we'll have a break around about sort of 11, just gone 11 to 11:15 to see the end of the suitable section for you to recharge your cups and then come back at it fresh when we look at the sort of second part of the process. So that's what we're going to be doing now, looking at how we have achieved some of the successes of the projects that I've just been sort of outlining to you. Before I do that, I just want to run through a couple of little definitions so that we're clear on what we mean by supply chain, or you're clear what I mean when I'm talking about a supply chain and supply chain management. So a supply chain definition of is or contains those organisations that are linked in the processes and activities used to transform raw materials to specific end user goods or services. So the supply chain is the start to finish, the raw materials at the beginning to the finished goods and services that the consumer has at the end of the process. The chain is every link and every element in that, of which your business will be one part in that link, in that chain. So it's the organisations connected together, but that also involves the movement and the transformation of materials, inventory, stock, and information, critically importantly, information, as part of that whole operation from start to finish. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about supply chains. We're talking start to finish of the entire process rather than just the your operation and those companies that immediately supply to you. In terms of supply chain management, that involves organising the cost-effective flow, hopefully cost-effective flow, storage of materials, in-progress inventory, stock, finished goods, and related information from the point of origin to the point of consumption to satisfy customer requirements. So it's the management of the supply chain and all of those movements and activities and flows that are taking place in a cost-effective manner. And it involves the integration of supply chain organizations through cooperative relationships. Let me really stress that the best performing supply chains are the ones where the individual organizations operate in a very cooperative and helpful manner. Where that doesn't take place and there isn't mutual benefit that is being achieved by organizations in a chain, you often find that there is poor levels of performance. So, involves the integration of supply chain organizations through cooperative relationships, effective processes, and information sharing to achieve procure performing value systems that have a competitive advantage. And this high-performing value system is at the heart of what we're trying to achieve. As you'll see as we move forward, supply chain development and supply chain management is looking at the value that is being added by each operation at each step in that overall chain of processes. And where we can remove waste or activities or things which don't add value, then we can improve the cost effectiveness and the overall performance. So a big part of getting the benefits from supply chain management is teasing out where the non-value is taking place and doing something about it. So we'll look at that in a little bit more detail further on. So supply chain management, that's what we're looking at, and that's what we mean when we're using those terms. So with that in mind, what I'd like to do is just sort of introduce you to the first step, a situation review. What's involved and why do we need it? Well, situation review is really to make sure that we understand the context of what we're trying to achieve by the supply chain. And by stepping back and looking at that big picture, we're able to understand what we're really wanting to achieve and whether we're going about achieving it in the best way that we can. COVID-19 has created such a massive disruption to the market, to the economy, that we simply can't assume that we can carry on working in the way that we did before and it still be effective. It is so disruptive. There are so many downstream challenges, difficulties that can come from it. We need to step back and fundamentally review the extent of the changes, how they might impact on our business, but on the supply chain that we're a part of, and what we do to adapt to be able to cope with that situation. Those of us that don't take the time out and that think we can carry on as normal in some rapid bounce back, I suspect will be struggling to survive as time goes on. So, situation review, big picture overview, what's going on that is driving us to have to rethink and adapt. One technique that we often use here, just as a sort of a starter for 10 to help us to sort of tease these out, is a technique, you may have come across it, it's very commonly used, called PESTLE, where PESTLE stands for 6 parameters that we just need to look at because they give us a broad perspective in terms of what is going to be, or a perspective of the sort of things that we need to consider when we're trying to get that big picture view. So P for political. What's going on in the political environment and how might that influence the new or the changes and disruptions that are taking place? And obviously that is going to be the imposition of a whole series of restrictions, some of the laws and penalties associated with that. And there is some significant political activities all taking place, which are driven around the healthcare of the nation and protecting the NHS from being overloaded with safeguards, massive lockdowns and impact on the economy, and some of the furloughing and other support grants that are around to try to ease some of the financial burdens associated with that. That in turn is having a big impact on the economy. The economy, I think, has gone through unprecedented decline. They're talking about some significant recessions, if not a depression, that might follow on afterwards, particularly if there's a second spike and we have to go back into lockdown again. All sorts of social consequences associated with that, particularly around social distancing, staying at home, as well as coping with not being able to work. Technological impact, we're moving online like you've never seen before, purchases online, meetings online, everything seems to be going online, and that seems to be the place that is still able to work and operate. Some legal consequences with new laws that have come in. I guess the only positive that we're seeing of COVID is the impact that it's having on the environment and significant levels of clean air and carbon reduction as a result of the reduction in traffic. So we can start to paint a picture, we can see the scene, we can understand what is going on so that we can try to translate some of that into how it might impact us, and in particular the supply chain that we're in, and therefore what sort of changes that we might need to make in order to be able to adapt to meet those new circumstances where we possibly can. So great big picture looking at that external environment to understand what the situation is and how it's changing. That's often not enough. We need to sort of drill down and have a sort of closer look and try to define the supply chain in more detail so that we can get that clearer understanding of which bits might be impacted and how. The critical thing I think to remember, which is often something which is so overlooked, is that the reality is the future is one not of competing companies, although companies do compete, but it's actually the supply chains that compete, because individual companies are part of integrated supply chains, and it's those supply chains overall that are in competition with each other. And the better the supply chain, the overall performance improvement, the more likely it is to succeed. So if you're part of an exceptional supply chain, you will have an advantage over your competitors who may not be in so fortunate a situation with the supply chains that they're in and that they have wrapped around them. So it's not you in isolation, but it's you in the context of the supply chain that you're in that you need to be taking steps to adapt and to rethink. So some considerations to keep in mind as you're trying to weigh things up, drill down and look at the specifics of what's changing, how it's changing, so that you can start to puzzle out what you might want to do about it. So considerations when reviewing supply chain situations, sort of key questions to ask. In terms of customer requirements, are they becoming more demanding or are they changing? Are those customers actually in a position where their supply chains are operating and they're currently at the moment being unsupported? They can't buy the goods and services that they previously had benefited from, and because of the lockdown. And when might those lockdown restrictions lift? And with all the social distancing and other healthcare protection measures that need to go into play, what capacity will they really have in terms of being able to bounce back to where they were before? Everybody is going to be looking to try to bounce back. Everybody's going to be looking for any little opportunity they can. So how is competition increasing? And what sort of competitive moves are we seeing in terms of changes to product range, and also managing what might be much smaller order sizes as the lockdown starts to ease, but businesses are only able to get back with part of their employed workforce that they had previously because there isn't space for any more to come in. What's the impact of new and fast-changing technologies, and what sort of opportunities might they bring in terms of solving problems, not just in terms of hardware but software too? Is the time to market, the lead times changing? And are we seeing an increase or a decrease in the types of activities that are being outsourced? Indeed, are the suppliers open or still there in order to be able to outsource too? And what sort of performance measures are we seeing? You may or may not have come across a performance measure called OTIF, which stands for on time, in full. And it's a measure that's often used, particularly in manufacturing companies, but not just limited to them, where a customer can measure a supplier in terms of their reliability to meet the orders that they've placed on time, in full, and were they late, and were they part orders, were the bits missing and are having to come separately later. So OTIF is a really good measure to help gain a feel for supplier performance. And what's happening around pricing? Is prices just being slashed in order to give some suppliers competitive advantage? And if so, are some running at a loss? And how long will they be able to sustain that before they go under? There's a whole raft of issues that you need to consider as part of really trying to understand the nitty-gritty of the situation that we're in as a result of the COVID outbreak, let alone some of those other challenges that you might have been having above and beyond those. And the sooner we can get to grips with them, the sooner we can start asking those questions, if we haven't already been doing so, the sooner we can start to put some resolve in place. So, food for thought, things for you to think of. And if you haven't already been doing it, I'd encourage you to start to sort of really think about some of these things, because it's not going to be too long now before we see shops opening and sort of steps emerging that will help us to get back to some sort of tentative normality. So, supply chains, they tend to be structured and organized in a way that helps us to sort of see them and understand them. So there's an example here of an automotive industry structuring, and for those of you that are familiar with the supply chain network diagrams, you'll note that the supply chain is divided into a series of layers or tiers, as they're referred to, that denote this sort of nature of the activity that is being undertaken, from sort of raw material supply to individual component manufacture through to sort of sub-assemblies, full assemblies, and on to the end user. So the OEM is the original equipment manufacturer. So in the car industry, that would be somebody like Land Rover, Jaguar, Toyota, Mitsubishi, Honda, and they would have a supply chain that supports them that is divided into these tiers. So the tier ones would be the module or the major assembly and system suppliers. Supporting them would be the sub-assembly component suppliers. Supporting them would be the individual parts suppliers. And at tier 4, you would have raw material supply going into those. So we can sort of see an organized display of what the supply chain might look like and which organizations sit in which tier. That sort of gives us a feel for the nature of the work that they might be doing. That example that I just I mentioned to you there is shown in that adjacent pyramid. So supply chains are structured and drawn in this way. So you can break them down into a specific individual supply chain. Now, these things tend to be commercially sensitive, so you don't tend to find this information generally available, and often you have to do a bit of research to try and sort of tease it out. Obviously, the OEM will have visibility of it because they built it, but individual suppliers in the chain may not know specifically who all the other suppliers might be and exactly what they do. So what I've done here is just show an example of a business, your business, and where it might fit in terms of an overall supply chain, a relatively simple one just for the demonstration. So you can see that that particular enterprise has got a number of suppliers coming in, so it's tier 2, so it's sort of subsystem, sub-assembly type of operations, and is bringing in components through its tier 3 suppliers, who in turn have been supported by the raw material tier 4 suppliers. So raw materials going in, component parts being made in tier 3 that are coming together and being put into assemblies at tier 2, which then go into the major assemblies in tier 1 that then go into the final finished product that is sold to the customer, that is then consumed by the end user. You'll notice in these constructions there can be sort of a number of different ways that they're set up. So you can have direct chains that feed into an OEM, and that is often the case for the new products that might be coming through, or services. But with, if we sort of use the automobile industry as an example, once a car's been sold, then there's ongoing maintenance and repair and the likes, and therefore there is a need for continued parts to be manufactured that will supply garages who can undertake that maintenance work. So quite often where that's the case, you may see a warehouse or a hub, as they're often referred to, so that the sub-assemblies that are being produced by the enterprise that go into the new product, those parts or even those sub-assemblies may very well go into a hub where they're then made available to the end user as part of the repair and maintenance side. And a whole series of suppliers might be feeding into those, which in turn have their supply chains fed against them. So you can start to lay out the structure and understand the way in which a supply chain is being set up and how it operates in terms of being able to meet its overall function. So in the case of COVID, no car manufacturers going on, so all of this part of the supply chain may be closed down, but that doesn't mean to say that parts for cars that are currently being used can't still be supplied. So there may be some limited manufacturing that is going on in this supply chain here, which is feeding the hub, which in turn is keeping cars on the road, even though the new products are not being manufactured. So understanding that situation, the bigger picture, asking some of the key questions associated with where the market has changed, how it's become disrupted, looking at the particular specifics of the supply chain will enable you to gain a much better understanding of what's going on, where the impact might be, what the nature of that might be, and put you in a good position where you're informed well enough to be able to start to step back and have a fundamental think about what you're going to do about it. So, due to the COVID outbreak, what we're seeing is many businesses trying to meet social distancing and other guidelines, certainly before they can open. Some are remaining closed, some have ceased to trade, they were on the edge anyway, they didn't want to take the debt on, they've closed down, they may or may not start up again sometime in the future. So already a supply chain may have a series of gaps in it, or either permanent gaps or gaps because businesses are choosing to stay closed because the economic environment isn't right yet for them to commercially be able to operate. Too much cost, not enough customers. Those that are running may be running at reduced capacity, they've furloughed people and are also restricted by what might be a relatively small trickle of a material flow or information flow coming through from their suppliers. And others may not just be able to get the supplies that they need to be able to trade, so that's sort of kept them in a closed position. And I guess not all that will be visible within the supply chain as yet, because it's only as we start to emerge will we get to see the full extent of what the individual situations around each of those organizations are in the supply chain and how dysfunctional that might make it. So I think over the next week or two, we should be starting to get a better picture for that, but it doesn't harm you boning up, making inquiries and starting to get a feel for where those gaps might be apparent, and that you can get that early heads up on it. Some simply may be unwilling to take on more debt, and I've just called it a day, rather than building up massive amounts of debt, which the business will struggle for years to be able to have to pay back. Sometimes it's maybe just better to write it off and then save the money that you've got to restart again, if that's possible, not always. So the situation that we have is unprecedented. There are a significant amount of challenges that it's raising. There's massive uncertainty, and there is a requirement for some urgent action to be taken if we're going to be able to, as businesses, survive this period. Some of the steps that we take now may make the difference of not just surviving, but going on to thrive. So where we can have a survive then thrive strategy, it's well worth trying to tease that in as we're undertaking this work at the moment. So, situation review, stepping back, fundamentally understanding what it is that we're facing so that we can, with some information and some facts and some understanding, rethink and adapt to the situation that faces us. So I think at this point it would be good just to have a little bit of a break, but before we do that, if you have any questions that you're wanting to ask at the moment, then please use your chat function and send through any questions, and we'll just take a moment out to see if we can answer those, and then we'll take a sort of a 5-8 minute break for you to sort of recharge your brews, clear your minds, and come back, and I'll talk you through those following stages that the projects that I discussed earlier went through that help them make them into the success that they were. So any particular questions? Paul, have we got any questions coming through?
No questions so far, Steve. Just a reminder to everybody to use the question function. To log all your questions, we will get them over to Steve.
Right, yeah. So again, there's a question and answer session at the end. So if you don't have any questions now, you've got that available to you to use at the end. So we've been chatting for an hour, already sort of put a lot of information your way. Let's take a break, 5 minutes, recharge, and if we sort of come back, what time is it now? If we come back in sort of 5 minutes, was about 2 or 3 minutes past, 1 minute past 11. So if we come back, say 6-7 minutes past 11, and we'll pick things up again then. I'll look forward to talking to you more shortly. Thank you. Okay, are we all ready? I hope you've enjoyed that quick break and you've got yourself a top up with your brew. What we'll do then is pick up from where we left off. We had been talking about some of the practical projects in the introduction that I had been involved with, quite a wide and diverse range of those. And now what we're doing is we are walking through some of the steps that those projects went through that helped to structure and organize them in a way that led to the performance improvements that we saw and the building of supply chains that hadn't previously existed.
We do have a couple of questions, if that's okay, before you start.
Yeah, please just fire those through then, Paul.
Sure, yeah. So the first one is, why is SCM adopting blockchain?
Good question. And I'm not quite sure. Could you take a note of who sent that, and we'll get back to them on that?
Yeah, of course, no problem. The next question was, how important are manufacturing execution systems with COVID-19? They were in high demand before COVID-19. How important do you think they'll be now?
I think they'll be in higher demand, to be honest with you. I mean, if you're particularly looking at the sort of enterprise resource planning software or the equivalents of those, then I think those sort of software environments and those software programs are going to be absolutely key to helping businesses to adapt and manage and organize what might be quite a turbulent and highly volatile situation. So, so I can see some significant investments, and I certainly would encourage that of businesses to really sort of make sure that they've got the computational and software capabilities that will help them to manage the uncertain future going forward. So yeah, I think ERPs and other software will play a critical part in business, certainly in the manufacturing sector moving forward. And businesses that haven't made those investments may struggle without. So that will be my view on that.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That's all the questions for now.
Okay, right. Well, thanks for those questions. Please keep them coming. And we'll look into that first one a little bit more detail. I just need to understand the context of it before we give an answer. Looking now in terms of understanding the situation and what we need to do to deal with it, we sort of move on to the next stage, which is this sort of rethink and adapt. So let's just have a little look at that, and I'll sort of touch on some of those steps quite quickly. So we had discussed a particular supply chain example. We were able to look at its tier structure, and we could see where we fit in and the supply chain that we have, or those suppliers that we have as the enterprise marked in yellow. We can also see that in our circumstances that we are supplying the new products, but also providing parts to support repair and maintenance of products as well. So we've two income streams. One might be closed at the moment, which is the new product one, but there may still be some demand coming through to feed the hub for parts. What we don't know is which particular suppliers are operational throughout, and where there may be opportunities for the business, either in partnership with other suppliers or individually, to step in where a supplier may no longer be able to continue to trade or is unable to meet the demands that are being placed on them. So understanding the network, the organizations, and the individual circumstances that particular businesses may find themselves in could create an opportunity for collaborations, mergers, acquisitions, partnerships that change the shape and the dynamics of the supply chain significantly. Those may need to have to be done in consultation with the original equipment manufacturer, so as to make sure that they can consent and support those sorts of initiatives, because at the end of the day, they need to be happy with that supplier network that they have feeding their operations. So there's some strategic level thinking and opportunities that can come out from the market disruptions that are taking place. The next generation of millionaires may very well evolve as being the ones that came up with the most innovative entrepreneurial solutions that enabled key supply chains to adapt and develop in a way that their competitor supply chains were unable to. So, something to think about, something to be aware of. Don't just necessarily put the blinkers on and only look at your specific business circumstances and those that supply immediately to you. If you can take a broader perspective, then there may very well be, in consultation with your OEMs, opportunities in those supply chain networks for your business to pick up new income streams and broaden the scope within which you're able to supply in the future. So, food for thought, don't overlook it. There's potentially some strategic opportunities for it. However, what you need to do is make sure that you can meet the demands that are being placed on you, and you're able to work with those that supply to you in a way that is going to give you an ability to survive and potentially thrive on after that. So, in many cases, and certainly is the case now, what you'll find is that individual businesses who might struggle to meet their particular demands that their customers are placing on them turn around with a view to blaming the supply chain that is the cause of their problems. And you'll often hear, and I certainly do as I go, you know, somebody will tell you that it was the suppliers that weren't able to rise to the challenge that has been the fundamental cause of their inability to meet the demands that were placed on them. That's something I tend to challenge, because I've found in most cases it's just not the case. So it raises that question. So how much of our business performance is governed by those organisations that we have chosen to supply to us? Is our external supply chain really the problem? And why have we allowed it to be the problem that we claim it has become? Are sort of key questions that would be racing through my mind. So in terms of this rethink and adapt, then I start with the business itself, rather than looking at where everybody might be pointing the finger. So what we can do is we can start to map out and describe the internal operations of the business. I mean, it's a fundamental, integral part of the supply chain. So what we're looking at is a chunk of processes that fit within our organisation that are just one of the links in the overall supply process. So what we can do is we can start to look at the interaction that our suppliers have with those individual functions or departments within our operation. So stuff coming in that may go through the goods received system if we have a centralized one, or going off to the individual departments and functions if not, which makes it much harder to be able to keep a tally on. So stuff coming into goods received, going through operations, having that transformation into the product that we are supplying that can then be distributed. And there's all the complexity of the internal functions, and information movement, and procurement and ordering that is taking place. So fundamentally have a little look at that, how the materials and the stock are flowing through from the supplier out to the customer, and how well the information and monies are flowing from the customer back through our business and then on and out to our supplier. So let's just have a little look at how well we're doing, and in many cases we need to drill down and have a closer look at those processes. So there are some sort of key things that we need to sort of tease out, and one of the ways that we can do that is really trying to define our processes in terms of process maps or flowcharts. So we can start to describe the current state, or the as-is state as it's often referred to, by mapping out exactly what we do. Often done with post-its and brown paper, highly effective, bring the knowledge holders together, short, sharp bursts to create these maps. And once we've laid out and defined what we're doing and how and what our processes are doing, we can critique them. And I don't know if you can see here, but the yellow post-its denote activities, the rectangles are tasks, and the diamonds are decision points. So, you know, a task may feed into a decision point. You might do something, and is it good enough? If it is, it goes on to the next stage. If it isn't, then there's some rework or recovery that's needed. These ones on this photo here are coloured pink. They don't show particularly well, but the pink ones are the critiques. So they're observations, comments, that highlight some problem or some issue associated with the process that might not be working as well as we would like it to. So we can really start to interrogate and question how fit for purpose the processes that we're operating really are. So we can draw up our process mapping neatly, drop it into Excel or Visio or one of these other software packages that enables us to see what's going on. We can show the various individual suppliers all feeding through some sort of goods inward system, and that can then be drawn out. This is a food processing company example. We've got the sort of buying and selling and planning and forecasting, new product development activities all taking place. And then we've got the goods that are coming through for customer products, either going through one particular product line or going through another product line with a view that they end up in a store and are then dispatched out. And we can then start to overlay some of those critiques. So there may be an issue to do with the buying and planning, in that it's constantly being adjusted because there are problems with keeping the schedule up to date. There could be other issues to do with storage, in that there's not enough room, so stuff's being the latest stuff comes in at the front, and we need the older stuff to come out first, so we've got to move all that out the way to get to the older stuff. So we're constantly moving things around. It's all getting mixed up. It's a real mess. There could be all sorts of issues to do with maintenance, so equipment isn't working properly. There could be quality issues. there could be a whole variety of things which are all causing our performance to be substandard. And that creates a problem, because if we're focusing all our effort on trying to improve the performance of our suppliers, it's not really going to make that much difference if we haven't dealt with these problems that we've got within our own internal operations, because it doesn't matter a jot how good the supplier performance can be if we then can't convert that into the performance in terms of our output. So what we need to be doing is taking some measurements, benchmarking the extent of those particular problems, so that we can see that when we start to make changes and improvements, the impact and the size of the improvement that we're making, if indeed we are making an improvement. So in terms of the product, we might sort of measure volumes, flow rates, lead times. In terms of the plant availability, uptime, downtime, its throughput speed, quality defects, and the system called overall equipment effectiveness, OEE, that we use that can give us a good indication as to how fit for purpose our plant and equipment is. We can look at the value that is being added or not in terms of the throughput efficiency. Does it have to go through lots and lots of stages and activities and very little value is being added, or each little thing adds a tremendous amount of value to it? Also look at waste, downtime, some of the reasons for it, and correction, rework, duplication, over inspection. There's a whole variety of things that we can be doing in our process, often for good reason, that is actually not helping us. And as well as sort of looking at energy consumption, manpower, and material usage, etc. So we need to map out the processes, identify where we think things are going wrong, and put some benchmark measures in place so that we can really understand how fit for purpose our processes are, and we can see when we make changes the impact that they're having and whether or not they're having the sort of impact that we're wanting them to. What we can also do is analyze added value, because at the end of the day, our supply chain, when working at its best, will add the greatest amount of value for the smallest amount of extra work that's needed to be done. And therefore we can challenge each activity that we undertake to understand what its value content might be. So for example, we can go through the process map, and for each of the activities we can ask ourselves a question: is it real value added, i.e. is the customer prepared to pay for it? If so, it can stay. It may not be, but it still may have a business value added. It might be some measurement system that is helping us to have visibility of what's going on. So if it's not real value added, customers prepared to pay for it, or business value added, the business is prepared to pay for it, it has no value added at all, and we ought to see to what we can do to eliminate it, remove it, or at least reduce it down to the smallest amount we possibly can. And we can streamline our processes through this very, very effective but quite ruthless process. It's a phenomenal technique and can have some massive impact in terms of us improving our operation. And then us working with our suppliers to help them also to achieve similar improvements to the ones that we have been able to do. Identify key value added activities. These are our sweet spots, so something quite small but adds a big amount of value, and contrary, identify the sour spots, these activities where we really want to be eliminating them because there's an awful lot going on at quite a bit of cost, and it doesn't really add much to the value at all. So do we really need to have that done? In the UK, sort of often when we undertake these sorts of analysis exercises, these sort of business interventions, we find that there are opportunities to significantly reduce inventory and stock, or the money tied up in it, to reduce lead times, and to take significant cost out. There's also the opportunity to increase delivery reliability and increase the number of new product introductions that we're able to make that open up additional income streams that can again enhance the resilience of the business. So experience says, and when you know where to look, it helps tease them out more quickly, that there is a significant amount of benefit that can come from stepping back and fundamentally challenging and rethinking the way in which your business might be operating. So, if you can't achieve the performance standards yourself, how on earth do you expect to improve your supply chain network organizations? It's just not going to happen. But off the experience of you doing it for yourself, you're then in a position to be able to work with your suppliers to help them, or to recognize in other suppliers those things that you've done, that they've done too, that will help you to work with them as an alternative if your existing suppliers aren't wanting to go the distance. So you need to ask yourself, do you know what your opportunities for improved performance are? What are you doing to help your suppliers to give you the service that you want? How prepared and capable are you at really being able to make a change? And what is your current rating? Because if you can't answer some of these things, then you've most probably not been undertaking the sort of intervention that you should have been doing periodically. And now is an incredibly good time to be able to do it, because it's so needed in terms of the uncertainty and the challenges that COVID are bringing to us. Really encourage you to do that. Any questions on that rethink and adapt, fundamentally looking at that interrogation and analysis of your business with a view to rethinking how you want it to operate in terms of removing the waste? Has anything come through, Paul?
Not quite yet. No further questions so far.
Okay. Again, if you have some thoughts, we can pick it up at the next stage, and we've got the stage at the end. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity, if there was anything that needed clarification, to just touch on. Time's racing by, so let me dive into the next stage, which is sort of rebuilding your business. It's that adaptation implementation, which includes the development of the supply chain as part of the overall operation improvement to your business. So, key steps here. We're in an implementation phase, fundamentally, radically changing the way that your business operates and the way that the supply chain would then need to operate moving forward with the changes that you're making to your operation. So the sort of steps that we'd be looking at would be to ruthlessly rationalize the business processes to remove that non-value added activity and waste. One of the ways that we can best do that is to create what we call a future state process, where we map out a streamlined version of what we've got now, and it's something to work towards, and it identifies where some of that waste elimination and other changes might be. It's our blueprint, it's our specification for the future, it's the thing that we want to work towards. And having some clarity around that really helps us to plan to achieve it. Consider the strategic core competencies, absolutely essential. Some businesses where suppliers might be missing will pull that work back in and do it themselves. Others may not, they'll look for other suppliers to do it. But sitting at the heart of what your business does will be a set of core competencies. These are the things that make your business what it is, your unique selling proposition, the thing that define you and make you stand out from the crowd. And you need to be careful that you identify and understand what they are, because if you start outsourcing them all, it may be incredibly difficult for you to be able to deliver on those special features. So there are some things you just need to keep absolutely core to your business. The rest of it, you may not. And that's where you can outsource and bring suppliers in to help you. So you can focus on the really high value added stuff and let your suppliers bring in the rest. So fundamentally reviewing what you're going to make or do yourself and what you might need to buy in to wrap around it in order to be able to deliver what is being demanded of your business. Sits at the center of your existence and needs some careful consideration that you don't unwittingly start eating away at your core in a way that you shouldn't. Consider flexibility, stock safety requirements. That's in terms of what you may have already got and stored, but more in terms of reliability of your supply and flow of materials and stock coming through. Also, if you've got stock which has a shelf life and that these current times aren't eating into that too much, how do you get the stock turn that you're looking for to keep things fresh? Consider robustness of suppliers. Is relying on one single supplier sufficient, or do you actually need to have 2 or 3 that you can share the work between? So if one gets into trouble, you've got others that you could move the work through to. And on some critical supplies, moving to multiple supply formats can give you a robustness and a resilience that a single supply might not provide. Consider IT technology and information flows, absolutely key, and touches on the question that was asked earlier. I often think that the computer technology, the ERP software, the MRP software, the manufacturing planning and the likes, the capability of individual businesses and of supply chains can be enhanced incredibly if you've got some really powerful software that can help you organize, plan, manage, and give you the visibility of what's going on in a way that manual systems just can't do quickly enough or accurately enough. So really, really key to high levels of performance and ability to manage challenging, volatile and uncertain times. Keeping that information flowing, because if that gets corrupted or if that isn't flowing properly, nobody knows what to do, or people do the wrong thing. Okay, developing the relationships and key communication paths. So building on that software capability to share information effectively and to build trust. Mutually beneficial relationships tend to be the most long-lasting and tend to be the highest performing, because if each one benefits from information being shared between each other, then both parties are going to do that, and they're going to do it as much as they possibly can. So again, what sort of relationships are you trying to develop, and with what sort of organizations, so you can be clear about how you do that and how software or other information exchange systems can operate in a secure but timely way. Consider alliances and partnerships and policies that you might need to have, and that sort of also comes into that strategic development side of things that we were looking at before, where there might be opportunities to reposition yourself in the network or to pick up where other suppliers may be unable to. Consider a competency and loyalty rewards, again, to develop and reinforce those relationships. Poor relationships between a business and its supplier never end up well. Review relationship management, the systems and the technology to help you to implement them. So it's not just the sort of mechanics of the process, but actually it's the relationship that you have with the organizations within the supply chain network that can be so critically important. Don't underestimate that. It can be massive in terms of the benefits that can come from it. And avoid this sort of what we call a bullwhip effect, where you're using information to control suppliers in a way which isn't going to be beneficial to the supply chain. You might think it helps you, but actually the supply chain suffers. And if the supply chain's suffering, overall, you're less competitive. Okay, so other things to consider in terms of developing new organisational performance requirements, key performance indicators, both internally, but also for your external activities. So think of your operation as a supply chain, a part of the supply chain that just happens to be sat in front of the external supplier process supply chains that you have chosen. So, you know, we're looking here at things that will help business management, information management, and the management of the operations and the deliverables. So what you can't see, you can't manage. So you need to have some sensible dashboards in place that really give you that ability to manage effectively. And that will also help you to put things like a supplier rating and monitoring systems in place, and setting targets so that your suppliers, so the performance of your suppliers is visible to you, and that you're setting targets that they can work towards. So that they can understand what they need to do to gear up to meet your particular requirements and needs. Also, a key aspect of performance is creating new product design capabilities and processes to meet future product development. So looking at things like designing for ease of manufacture, design for ease of assembly, design for low-cost production. These are all some of the changes that we were talking about, where we're eliminating the waste and the non-value added activities that might have over a period of time crept into what what you do within your process, and looking at sort of sharing product development projects and risks with your suppliers. So a little bit of an insight in terms of some of the things that you need to consider when you're implementing. And not just get the blinkers on and look solely at the process, but think about the relationship side and some of the other things that make you much more agile, and giving yourself some good dashboards to give you the performance visibility so that you can see how well the business is now performing as it's being rebuilt or adapted and developed, and how the supply chains and suppliers fit in with that. Any particular questions that have come through so far that anybody wants to ask around that, or shall I move on?
No questions so far.
Okay, we'll pick up any at the end then. So moving on quickly, what I'm wanting to do now is just sort of touch on some of those aspects in terms of the sort of smooth management, effective management of the supply chain once you have sort of made those changes to it, and it's now much more fit for purpose and flexible and agile. You've got some good relationships that you're trying to develop with your suppliers, and you've got some good performance systems in place that give you visibility as to how well things are working. The sort of things that are involved in terms of supply chain management, things like forecasting demand, which I'm sure you'll all be doing, selecting suppliers where that's appropriate, ordering materials, managing the inventory and stock, scheduling production in the case of the manufacturing environment, scheduling what it is you do that adds the value that you add, shipping and delivery where that might be appropriate, and sort of organizing the exchange of information, whether it be through ERP software, handshaking and chatting through cloud-based systems or other means by which you might be passing information through the chain. So quite a mixed bundle of activities that are involved in that, and the overseeing and the management of them to ensure that they're running smoothly, given that we've got performance indicators that can now sit over them, given that we're developing relationships in order to be able to deal with any situations that might come up in a quick, sensible and complementary way, is all part of that environment that we're trying to create. I'm just going to touch on a couple of bits that sort of tend to be quite critical in this process, and often the ones where problems lie. And the first one of those is around forecasting demand, which for those of you that have ever done it will know just how incredibly difficult it can be. And with COVID, I think it's just got an order of magnitude more difficult. Some considerations when forecasting demand in terms of sort of what the items that you're trying to forecast, how far in the future are you trying to forecast them, and in the context of COVID, that might need reining in. You know, what's the length of time period that you're stating for forecast quantities? How frequently should the forecasts be made, reviewed and revised? Again, that frequency level might go up considerably given the uncertainty of what's going on. And you know, what constitutes an acceptable tolerance in terms of the forecast before things start going wrong. So real big focus needing to come in on this particular area, as it's going to be the one that is, I think, most impacted by the uncertainties coming out from the COVID situation. So when you start to get your demand or sales forecasting right, there's a number of sort of advantages that can come out from that. So the things to keep an eye on in terms of whether your forecasting is within those tolerance bands. So one is reduced excess inventory, so you're not buying a load of stuff that you're then not able to sell, so you've got a lot of money tied up in parts and materials that you've bought but are sat on your balance sheet. Fewer stock shortages, which result in demand exceeding supply. The worst thing that you can do is let your customer down, and hence the temptation to overbuy and have stuff sat around because you hadn't been able to get something, which then meant that you let a customer down, which can be quite damaging. So you've got this tightrope, not wanting to order too much and tie up a lot of cash, but not wanting to fall short of something and let a customer down. And it's a continuous balancing act that you'll have in terms of getting that forecast of demand right. Fewer unnecessary production line changes to fulfill anticipated demand. So when you are running short on something, you have to stop a line, change it all over, reset it up, produce a short batch of stuff that you're short on, and then swap all the line back over. It's just downtime and waste. That, if you can avoid that, is really, really good. So the impact of getting your demands your forecast of demands not quite right, you're starting to see all of the ramifications that can come and bite you. And I think it's going to be a real challenge as we look out into the future to try to get that sorted. Less overtime hours through improved predictions in terms of performance requirements, etc. So quite a number of things that you need to be concentrating on just to really get that sort of demand forecasting as close as you can. Otherwise, it will drive you into making decisions which ultimately could cost the business dear. The other thing in terms of selecting new suppliers, so if a supplier goes missing, ceases to trade, doesn't want to open yet, or has decided that they've seen an opportunity somewhere else and they're going for that in the meantime, then you need to be sort of looking at trying to fill some of those gaps if you're not bringing the work back in-house. So just sort of a number of key things in terms of the obvious, price, quality, reliability, credit terms, shipping costs, but then some of the softer skills in terms of the nature of the support services, the type of relationship you might be able to develop with them, the investment that they've made in management systems, accreditations, and approved schemes which are recognised in the industry, for the resilience that they might have and their ability to comply with some of the things that you want. So you need to look at that whole transaction cost of dealing with a supplier, not just the superficial price, particularly in the sort of environments that we've been talking about building, where supplier relationship is a real key performance aid. So analyse what suppliers' requirements are for goods and services, lot sizes, packaging, etc., information, how much and when. Just because they're in the same supply chain doesn't mean to say that they're set up and operating in the same way that you do. So you need to understand that and see how compatible and easy it is for the two of you to work in the ways in which you're set up. So compare your needs and abilities against their requirements. And note that mutually beneficial relationships are the ones that tend to last the longest. So positive trends in supply chain management to look out for is a reduced number of suppliers. Then you've got some good ones, they're resilient, they're able to meet your needs, and they give you the security that you're looking for. And you've not got a myriad of complexity in terms of different things coming from different suppliers working in different ways and all the procurement issues associated with that. Long-term relationship with suppliers rather than short-term unharmonious ones. Integrated information infrastructures, and again, the ERP software can be incredibly powerful in terms of information flow through the chain. Suppliers considered to be an essential part of the business, and suppliers involved in future product development programs. They're some of the sort of softer measures that you can make that give you an indication as to how well your supply chain management is working, and in which particular areas you might have an issue, so that you can focus on those. So hopefully that's given you an insight to the steps that you might be able to take practically in terms of transforming your business performance, in terms of taking a whole supply chain perspective. There's lots of support out there for you, and what I wanted to do was just quickly touch before we go into the question and answer mode. Some particular supply chain specific business support and guidance that's around. There's an organisation that is being run through a cluster of councils across Yorkshire, the Humber, and I think Lincolnshire, that it is providing support to help businesses to develop and improve not just their own performance, but their supply chains overall. It's being coordinated through the East Riding of Yorkshire Council, but Hull City Council, and I think some of the of Lincolnshire councils are involved, as well as other councils dotted across the Yorkshire region. There's a website available. I'll give you the code for. I'll give you the address for it in a minute. Now, this is a team that were involved with the Greenport programme, which ran for 7 years, assisting local regional businesses to gain access into the renewables industry incredibly successfully. And they bring all of that experience through into this project, where they're doing a similar thing, but it's not just for renewables, it's for a much, much broader range of business sectors. So they are looking to try to make opportunities available for businesses to be able to engage with in new supply chains, and also enabling businesses to grow. So making opportunities visible, making opportunities accessible, making opportunities winnable. The project involves 3 things. It's a supplier directory. If you're not already registered on it, I'd strongly encourage you to do so, as many other suppliers have already done so. And there's a great opportunity there for you to see other suppliers in this region. If you're looking for new suppliers, it might be a great place to start. Then mapping these new bigger opportunities as they come along and making those visible so that you can see whether there are opportunities for you to do that. And there's a raft of business support services that will help you to do that. So the supplier directory, it's currently online, it's live, it's a free online central hub, really to showcase the region's suppliers, products and services. And I'd encourage you to get on and register with that. It's something which is now starting to come good, the mapping of opportunities. So when major opportunities come into the region, details of those will be available through this part of the website, with a view to you to see if that's appropriate for you to engage in those. And there's a package of support measures, including some business support grants, a variety of workshops, webinars. There's a range of specialist consultancies, ongoing information and support from the team to give you the guidance and the support and the direction to help you to improve your own supply chain, but also to access and gain entry into new ones. So the statement that they have put out recently, which I won't read out, but basically recognising the special situation that COVID has brought about, with a view that the team being super supportive to help businesses overcome challenges that come out of that above and beyond. So they're the contact details. That's the email address, the website, www.supplychainnetwork.co.uk, and there's a telephone number if you wanted to speak to somebody. Strongly encourage you to do that. It's sort of the central hub, the focal point for business support as far as supply chain development or supply chain management is concerned. It's not the only support around. There's a whole package of measures available through the Humber Business Growth Hub in terms of ICT grants for homework or investing in new software or systems that might be helping you to gain access into new opportunities. There's support, consultancy support, finance, and they complement all of the wide range of government supports as well. So have a little look, humbergrowthhub.org, If you have a look at the COVID-19 webpage, you'll see all of the grant support that's available to you there. So well worth a look. Try and access as much of the grant support that you can, free of charge, through both of those organisations that complement each other. So that's what I wanted to cover. It's just coming up to the end of our session now, and really wanted to open up to any particular questions that you might have. If there are any at all, please feel free to fire them.
It's looking like we haven't got any so far, Steve.
Okay, not to worry. Have you got the details from the first question, and we can get back to them separately?
Yeah, we can get back to you. That asked about the SCM adopting blockchain. We can come back to you separately on that. That's no problem.
Yeah.
We can just point out as well, if anyone comes up with any questions or would like any further support after today's session related to anything to do with supply chains, you are able to access one-to-one support through the Growth Hub and speak with Steve on a one-to-one basis to help you in your business.
And I'd also remind you that there are these other webinars that are currently organised to run. So next Wednesday afternoon, there's the dynamic leadership. In the morning, there's the mental health and well-being that Rachel Alexander's running. And then the following Wednesday afternoon after that, there is the restructuring your business. Again, all interrelated to helping businesses deal with the unprecedented challenges that you're all facing at the moment. With no further ado then, I have come to the end of the presentation. I hope you found that informative. I hope there's been some aspects in there that has got you to step back and think about, and hopefully some of the tools and techniques and the approach that we've used, you will be able to use to good advantage as you deal with the challenges that you face moving forward. I wish you every best wishes and best of luck in doing that. And as Paul mentioned, there's a wealth of support around to support you, either ourselves or some of those organisations that I was referring to, in particular the supply chain network. So thank you for your time, and I hopefully look forward to talking to you again next week. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Steve. And I hope you'll have a safe time. And as I say, Steve said, do contact us if you need any further support. If you need to refer back to this presentation, you should be able to find this on the Growth Hub website, I imagine, by the end of the week. So if you'd like to recover some of the points that Steve's been through, do check the Growth Hub website. But for now, stay safe, and hopefully we'll see you on the next series of workshops. Thank you.